rainwater slid down the black marble steps of Carter Medical Center, while people in expensive coats hurried beneath the glow of the hospital lights, avoiding the cold Chicago wind that whipped through the avenue. Across the street, traffic crawled through sheets of rain, headlights reflecting against the soaked pavement like broken glass. Near the entrance, a thin boy stood beside the valet station, clutching the sleeve of an oversized hoodie that looked barely warm enough for the weather. Most people ignored him before he could even speak, their eyes sliding past him the same way they ignored the homeless tents beneath the train tracks a few blocks away. "Please," the boy said quietly to a couple rushing toward the doors. "Do you maybe have something to eat?" The woman tightened her grip on her purse and kept walking. Inside the lobby, Dr. Evelyn Carter adjusted the cuff of her coat while one of the hospital board members continued talking about investors, donors, and expansion plans for the pediatric wing. Her smile remained perfectly measured, elegant and effortless in the way years of wealth had taught her to be. But her attention drifted when she noticed her daughter standing near the glass entrance, staring outside into the rain. "Chloe," Evelyn called softly, "we're leaving." Chloe barely turned. "Mom, there's a kid out there." Evelyn followed her gaze with mild annoyance at first, expecting another teenager asking for money near the hospital entrance. Then she saw him, thin shoulders, pale skin, soaked clothes clinging to his arms. The boy swayed slightly where he stood, one trembling hand pressed against the side of the building as if he were trying very hard not to fall. "He looks sick," Chloe whispered. "Somebody should help him." "There are shelters for that," Evelyn replied automatically, already turning away. "Security will handle it." Chloe frowned at her. "You're serious?" Before Evelyn could answer, the boy tried taking a step toward the entrance. His knees suddenly buckled beneath him, and his body crashed hard against the wet concrete. The sound stopped everything. Several people gasped. One of the valets rushed forward while Chloe instinctively pushed through the lobby doors into the rain. "Hey! Hey, can you hear me?" she cried, kneeling beside him. The boy's breathing came in weak, uneven pulls. His lips had turned pale from the cold, and when Chloe touched his shoulder, she felt him shaking violently beneath the soaked fabric. "Mom!" Chloe shouted toward the entrance. "Call somebody!" Evelyn stepped outside more slowly, irritation fading into professional focus as years of medical instinct took over. She crouched beside the boy while rain dotted the shoulders of her expensive coat. Her fingers pressed against his neck, searching for a pulse. Weak, dangerously weak. "Get a gurney out here now," she ordered sharply. Hospital staff immediately scattered into motion. The boy's eyes fluttered open for half a second. Fear flashed across his face so suddenly and so intensely that it almost didn't look conscious. "Don't," he murmured weakly. "Please don't send me back there." "You're okay," Chloe whispered. "You're safe." The boy looked toward Evelyn then, dazed and barely conscious. For one brief moment his expression changed, as though he recognized something about her face even through the blur of exhaustion. "What's your name?" Evelyn asked calmly. His lips trembled before the answer finally came out. "Noah." A medic slid the stretcher beside them while another nurse began checking his vitals. "Last name?" Evelyn asked without looking up. The boy swallowed painfully. "Reed." The world around Evelyn seemed to disappear beneath the sound of the rain. Her hand froze against his wrist, not because of the name alone, because she already knew exactly who he was. The rain had not stopped by the time Noah was transferred into the intensive care unit on the 7th floor. Water still clung to the dark strands of his hair, while nurses moved around him beneath the cold white lights, attaching monitors, adjusting oxygen levels, speaking in calm professional voices that blurred together into meaningless noise inside his exhausted mind. Beyond the glass walls of the room, the city glowed in distant streaks of silver and blue, Chicago breathing restlessly beneath the storm. Evelyn stood near the doorway with her arms crossed tightly against herself, watching one of the residents review Noah's blood work on a tablet. "Severe malnutrition," the resident said quietly. "Anemia, too. We're running more tests now." Evelyn gave a short nod without responding. The young doctor hesitated before adding, "Honestly, if he hadn't collapsed in front of the hospital tonight, I don't know how much longer he would have lasted." Those words settled heavily into the silence. Evelyn stared through the glass at Noah's unconscious body, while memories she had spent years burying clawed violently toward the surface. Not full memories at first. Fragments. A cramped apartment with peeling paint. The smell of cigarette smoke trapped in old curtains. A crying baby at 3 in the morning, while snow pressed against broken windows. Marcus asleep on a stained couch with an empty bottle hanging loosely from one hand. Her own reflection in a dirty bathroom mirror at barely 22 years old. Exhausted and terrified of becoming trapped in that life forever, she forced the memories away almost immediately. "Make sure the hospital board doesn't hear about this situation," she said coldly. "No press, no social media exposure, nothing connected to the Carter name." The resident blinked in confusion. "It's just a homeless kid. It becomes a story the second people decide to turn it into one." Without waiting for an answer, Evelyn turned and walked down the corridor in the sharp rhythm of expensive heels striking polished floors. The far end of the hallway, Chloe sat curled in a chair outside Noah's room, wearing one of the hospital blankets around her shoulders. Her makeup had washed away in the rain earlier, leaving her looking younger than usual, almost fragile beneath the fluorescent lights. "You're still here?" Evelyn asked. Chloe looked up immediately. "Is he okay?" "He's stable. That's not what I asked." Evelyn exhaled slowly, already tired of the conversation before it fully began. "He's very sick, Chloe. The doctors are doing what they can." Chloe glanced back through the glass toward Noah. "Did you see the way he looked at people outside?" she asked softly. Like he already knew nobody was going to help him. Evelyn remained silent. "He's my age, Mom." "No," Evelyn corrected quietly. "He's not." The answer sounded strange even to her. Before Chloe could respond, Daniel Carter stepped out of the elevator carrying 2 coffees in one hand and his phone in the other. Even after 15 years of marriage, he still had the same calm presence that could soften a room without trying. Tall, composed, dressed in a charcoal overcoat still damp from the rain, he crossed the hallway toward them with concern written clearly across his face. "I came as soon as Chloe called," he said. "What happened?" "A boy collapsed outside," Evelyn answered. Daniel looked through the ICU window and frowned slightly. "Jesus." "He was freezing," Chloe added quickly, "and barely breathing." Daniel studied Noah for several quiet seconds before lowering his voice. "Does he have family?" "No idea," Evelyn replied too quickly. Something flickered across Daniel's expression at the speed of instinct. It was small, almost invisible, but Evelyn noticed it immediately because she knew him too well. He had heard the tension in her voice. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. The problem wasn't simply that Noah existed. The problem was that the moment she heard his last name, something inside her had fractured so suddenly that she still couldn't fully control the panic rising beneath her skin. For years she had convinced herself that part of her life was dead, buried somewhere beneath money, success, and carefully curated perfection. She had built entire walls inside herself to survive what she had done. And now that boy was lying 1 floor below her private office. Alive. Chloe stood from the chair. "Can I stay with him for a little while tomorrow?" "No." The answer came instantly. Both Chloe and Daniel looked surprised. "Why not?" Chloe asked. "Because he needs rest." "That's a terrible excuse." "Chloe." "No, seriously, Mom, what is your problem tonight?" Evelyn's jaw tightened slightly. "My problem is that emotionally attaching yourself to strangers is dangerous." "He's not dangerous. You don't know anything about him. And you do?" The question landed harder than Chloe realized. For one brief second, Evelyn lost control of her expression. Daniel noticed, not fully, but enough. A heavy silence settled between them before Evelyn finally looked away first. "I'm going home," she said quietly. "You two should do the same." She turned toward the elevator, but before the doors closed behind her, she glanced once more through the ICU window. Noah had opened his eyes, weakly, barely conscious, but he was looking directly at her. and somehow that frightened her more than anything else that had happened that night. By sunrise, the storm had weakened into a cold drizzle that painted the windows of Carter Medical Center in thin silver lines. The city beyond the ICU looked exhausted after the night before, buried beneath heavy clouds and pale morning light that barely reached the upper floors of the hospital. Inside room 714, machines continued their quiet mechanical rhythm around Noah's bed, while the smell of antiseptic and coffee drifted through the corridor outside. Noah woke slowly to the sound of distant footsteps and rolling carts crossing polished floors. For a few disoriented seconds, he thought he was back beneath the freeway overpass, where he usually slept during colder nights. But the softness of the mattress beneath him immediately felt wrong. Too clean, too warm. His eyes moved carefully around the room until they landed on the IV connected to his arm. Then panic hit him. He grabbed weakly at the tubing and tried pulling himself upright. Hey, don't do that!" A nurse rushed toward him before he could remove the needle completely. Noah's breathing turned uneven as he looked around the room with raw survival instinct flashing across his face, like an animal waking inside a trap. "You're okay," the nurse said calmly while easing him back against the pillow. "Nobody's gonna hurt you." People always said that right before they did. Noah stared at her without speaking. "You collapsed outside the hospital last night," she continued more gently. "You were hypothermic and severely dehydrated. Do you remember any of that?" His silence stretched long enough to answer for him. The nurse softened her voice even further. "What's your full name?" "Noah Reed." "Okay, Noah. I'm Rachel. You're safe here." Safe. The word sounded almost absurd. Rachel checked the monitor beside his bed before offering him a small cup of water. Noah hesitated at first, then took it carefully in both hands, drinking with the kind of caution that came from too many days without knowing when the next meal would come. "You have family we can call?" she asked, his eyes lowered immediately toward the blanket. "That's complicated." Before Rachel could continue, a soft knock interrupted them. Chloe stepped halfway into the room carrying a paper bag from the hospital cafe, her long coat still damp from the rain outside. "I brought food," she said quietly. Rachel glanced between them with mild surprise. "Visiting hours don't start for another hour." "I know," Chloe admitted. "I just wanted to see if he was awake." The nurse studied her for a second before finally smiling faintly. 5 minutes. As soon as Rachel left the room, silence settled awkwardly between them. Chloe approached slowly, almost carefully, as though she understood instinctively that sudden kindness might scare him more than coldness. "I got you coffee too," she said while placing the bag beside the bed. "Although honestly it's hospital coffee, so it's probably terrible." Noah looked at the bag but didn't touch it. "You don't have to worry," Chloe added quickly. "I didn't poison it." That finally pulled the faintest reaction from him. Not a smile exactly, but something dangerously close to one before it disappeared again. "My dad says bad coffee should legally count as emotional abuse." Noah's voice came out rough from dehydration. "Then this place should probably go to prison." This time Chloe actually laughed softly. The sound caught him off guard. It had been a long time since someone around him laughed without cruelty attached to it. She sat carefully in the chair beside the bed. "You scared everybody last night." "I didn't mean to." "You almost died." Noah looked toward the rain-covered windows instead of answering. Outside, gray clouds drifted slowly between the skyscrapers, while helicopters crossed the distant skyline above the city. Everything looked cold, expensive, untouchable. "This place is weird," he murmured. "Weird good or weird bad?" "Both." Chloe followed his gaze toward the skyline. "Yeah, it kind of feels like nobody actually sleeps here." For the first time since waking up, Noah's shoulders relaxed slightly. Not much, just enough to notice. Meanwhile, several floors above them, Evelyn stood inside her office staring at Noah's medical file displayed across her computer screen. The words blurred together after a while because she already knew what mattered most before opening it. Reed age. 13, no known guardian present. Her fingers tightened slowly against the edge of the desk. A quiet knock came from outside. "Come in." Rebecca Hale stepped into the office carrying a thin folder beneath one arm. Unlike most people inside the hospital, she moved with the calm confidence of someone unimpressed by wealth, titles, or carefully rehearsed authority. Her dark coat still carried traces of rain across the shoulders. "Dr. Carter," she said politely. "I'm Rebecca Hale with Child Protective Services." Evelyn immediately masked every emotion crossing her face. "I assumed someone would come eventually." Rebecca studied her carefully before speaking again. "The nurses informed me the boy arrived with no identification except an old transit card and some cash. He was alone, and no parent has contacted the hospital." "No." Rebecca nodded once, though something in her expression suggested she was already noticing details that didn't fit together cleanly. "I'd like permission to speak with him once he's stable." Evelyn closed the file on her monitor a little too quickly. "That may not be necessary." Rebecca's eyes lifted slowly toward hers. "Why wouldn't it be necessary?" The question hung quietly between them, and for the first time since Noah collapsed outside the hospital, Evelyn realized someone else had started pulling at the loose thread she had spent 13 years trying desperately to bury. Rebecca left Carter Medical Center shortly after noon, with Noah's temporary file resting on the passenger seat beside her, while gray clouds continued drifting low above Chicago. Traffic crawled through wet streets still shining from the storm, and every few blocks she caught herself glancing again at the address handwritten across the corner of the intake report. Marcus Reed, South Halsted Street. The deeper she drove into the south side, the more the city seemed to change around her. Luxury towers disappeared behind aging brick buildings stained by decades of smoke and rain. Storefront gates rattled in the wind. Old diners sat half-empty beneath flickering signs, and beneath the elevated train tracks, clusters of tents pressed against concrete walls like forgotten shadows of the city nobody wealthy ever had to look at. By the time Rebecca finally parked outside the scrapyard, the drizzle had started again. The place looked barely functional. Rusted fences leaned crookedly around mountains of twisted metal, while old car parts lay scattered through puddles darkened by oil and rainwater. Somewhere deeper inside the yard, machinery groaned loudly before falling silent again. Rebecca stepped carefully through the mud toward a small office trailer near the back. A radio was playing inside, old country music. She knocked once against the metal frame before opening the door halfway. Marcus Reed looked up slowly from a stained table cluttered with receipts, tools, and empty beer bottles. He appeared older than 50, though Rebecca suspected life had simply worn him down faster than time itself. His beard had gone unevenly gray, his eyes red from exhaustion more than alcohol, and despite the roughness surrounding him, there was something strangely alert about the way he studied strangers before speaking. "If you're here about unpaid taxes," he muttered, "you'll have to get in line." Rebecca closed the door behind her. "I'm not from the city." "Then you're definitely not here to help me." "My name is Rebecca Hale. I work with Child Protective Services." Something shifted immediately in his expression. Not fear. Recognition. His eyes dropped instinctively toward the half-empty bottle near his elbow before slowly returning to her face. "This about Noah?" Rebecca nodded carefully. Marcus leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for several long seconds as though preparing himself for something he had already expected to happen eventually. "He alive?" The question came out rougher than she expected. "Yes." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Rebecca noticed the relief immediately, even though he clearly tried hiding it. "He collapsed outside Carter Medical Center last night," she explained. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition too." Marcus gave a bitter laugh beneath his breath and rubbed one hand across his face. "Sounds about right. You knew he was in that condition?" His jaw tightened. "You think I don't know what my own son looks like? Then why didn't you get him help?" The question hit harder than Rebecca intended. Marcus stood abruptly from the chair and walked toward the small, rain-streaked window beside the trailer door. Outside, workers moved scrap metal beneath the gray sky, while train tracks rattled somewhere nearby. You want to know something funny? He asked quietly without turning around. When people look at someone like me, they think there's always one moment where everything went wrong. Like you wake up one morning and suddenly your whole life's destroyed. He shook his head faintly. That's not how it happens. It happens slow. So slow you don't even notice it at first. Rebecca remained silent. Marcus finally looked back toward her. I used to fix engines for half the city. Had my own garage too. Small place, but enough to pay rent. A faint smile touched his face briefly before disappearing again. Then Noah came along, and around the same time his mother decided she wanted a different life. Rebecca watched him carefully. Evelyn Carter. Marcus laughed again, this time colder. She goes by Evelyn now? That wasn't her name before? No. He grabbed the bottle from the table but stopped himself before drinking. Back then, she was Evelyn Reed, 22 years old, smartest girl I ever met. His eyes lowered toward the floor, and the most terrified. Rain tapped softly against the trailer roof while the silence stretched between them. She left? Rebecca asked quietly. Marcus nodded once. One day she just packed a bag and walked out. His voice remained calm, but Rebecca could hear the old wound buried beneath every word. Said she was tired of living like we did. Tired of bills. Tired of watching me come home covered in grease every night. He swallowed hard. Tired of Noah too. Rebecca glanced toward the folder in her hands. Did she know where he ended up? She knew enough. And you never contacted her? Marcus finally took a drink this time before answering. At first I did. His eyes drifted toward the rain outside again. Then she married Rich. Another bitter smile. After that, lawyers started answering instead of her. Rebecca slowly absorbed the weight of everything she was hearing. This wasn't simply abandonment. This was erasure. She built an entirely different life, Rebecca murmured. Marcus looked directly at her then. That woman spent 13 years pretending Noah never existed. The trailer fell quiet again, except for the distant groaning of metal outside. Rebecca studied Marcus carefully. Underneath the exhaustion, the drinking, and the damage life had carved into him, she could still see pieces of the man he must have once been. Not dangerous, not cruel, just broken long before anyone bothered noticing. Mr. Reed, she said gently, your son needs stability now more than anything else. A shadow crossed Marcus's face immediately. I know what you're thinking, he said. That I failed him. Rebecca didn't answer, because they both already knew it was true. Marcus lowered himself slowly back into the chair and stared down at his hands. Thick hands, scarred hands, hands that looked capable of rebuilding engines but somehow incapable of holding a family together. I tried, he whispered. God help me, I really did. And for the first time since entering the scrapyard, Rebecca believed him. That same evening, Carter Medical Center hosted its annual donor reception on the top floor of the East Tower, where the city stretched endlessly beneath walls of glass and gold lighting softened every expensive surface in the room. Waiters moved silently between politicians, surgeons, investors, and wealthy couples dressed in dark tailored coats, while jazz music drifted through the air just loudly enough to disguise private conversations. From the outside, everything looked flawless, exactly the way Evelyn needed it to look. She stood near the center of the ballroom speaking with members of the hospital board, while cameras flashed occasionally near the charity banners arranged beside the stage. Her black dress, elegant and severe, reflected the same polished control she had spent years constructing around herself. Even her smile appeared professionally measured tonight. Only Daniel noticed the difference. He watched her from across the room while nursing a glass of whiskey he had barely touched all evening. Most people would never have seen it. The tension in her shoulders, the way she kept losing focus in the middle of conversations, the way her eyes instinctively searched every entrance whenever the elevator doors opened. She was waiting for something, or afraid of it. Chloe approached him near the bar carrying 2 sparkling waters. You've been staring at Mom for like 20 minutes, she murmured. Daniel accepted one of the glasses without taking his eyes off Evelyn. Your mother's acting strange. She's been acting strange since last night. You noticed it too. Chloe nodded slightly before glancing toward the ballroom. I went to see Noah again this afternoon. That finally pulled Daniel's attention away from Evelyn. And? He's funny. A faint smile crossed her face. In a depressing trauma survivor kind of way. Daniel almost smiled too, but the expression disappeared quickly. What's going on with your mom and that kid? I don't know, Chloe admitted quietly. But every time somebody mentions him, she looks like she can't breathe. Across the room, Evelyn forced herself to continue smiling while one of the board members spoke enthusiastically about upcoming expansion plans. With the pediatric center fully funded, the man explained, we'll easily become one of the most respected medical institutions in the Midwest. Evelyn nodded automatically, then froze. Near the ballroom entrance, Rebecca Hale had just stepped off the elevator. She wasn't dressed for the gala, dark coat still damp from the rain. CPS badge clipped near her waist, serious expression untouched by the luxury surrounding her. She looked completely out of place, which somehow made her presence even more threatening. Evelyn excused herself from the conversation almost immediately and crossed the ballroom toward her before anyone important noticed. "What are you doing here?" she asked under her breath. Rebecca remained calm. "I tried calling your office." "This isn't appropriate." "What isn't appropriate," Rebecca replied quietly, "is a child spending 13 years erased from his own mother's life." The words hit like ice water. Evelyn's expression hardened instantly. "You should be very careful about accusations you can't prove." "I spoke with Marcus Reed." For the first time all evening, genuine fear flashed across Evelyn's face before she could stop it. Rebecca saw it. So did Daniel. From across the ballroom, he watched the interaction carefully while a cold sensation slowly settled in his stomach. He couldn't hear the conversation itself, but he knew his wife well enough to recognize when she stopped performing and started panicking. And Evelyn Carter was panicking. Rebecca lowered her voice further. "I also saw the birth certificate." Evelyn's pulse thundered violently now, though outwardly she still looked composed. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." "No," Rebecca corrected softly. "I understand exactly what this is." People continued laughing nearby. Glasses clinked, music played. But around them the atmosphere had changed completely. Evelyn glanced toward the ballroom entrance, toward the board members, toward the journalists speaking near the stage, mentally calculating how fast her entire life could collapse if Rebecca decided to say the wrong thing in the wrong room. "You should leave," Evelyn said quietly. Rebecca held her gaze. "Noah asked me today why nobody ever came looking for him." Evelyn looked away first, just for a second, but that second was enough. "Do you know what he said after that?" Rebecca continued. "He said maybe some people are just easier to forget." Something inside Evelyn cracked at those words, though she fought desperately not to let it show. "You think this is simple?" she whispered harshly. "You think people survive poverty without becoming desperate?" Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. "This isn't about survival anymore, Dr. Carter. You survived a long time ago." Before Evelyn could answer, Daniel suddenly appeared beside them. The silence that followed felt immediate and dangerous. Rebecca straightened slightly. "Mr. Carter." Daniel looked between both women carefully. "Am I interrupting something?" "No," Evelyn answered too quickly. "Yes," Rebecca said at the same time. The contradiction hung sharply in the air. Daniel's eyes shifted slowly toward his wife, and for the first time since they met over 15 years earlier, Evelyn realized she could no longer fully predict what her husband was thinking. "You mind telling me what this is about?" he asked calmly. Rebecca hesitated. Evelyn could practically feel her entire future balancing on whatever came next. Then Rebecca looked directly at Daniel and said quietly, "It's about Noah Reed." The color drained subtly from Evelyn's face. Daniel noticed that too, and in that exact moment, even before hearing the truth itself, he understood something devastating. His wife had been lying to him for a very long time. The gala ended later than expected, though Daniel barely remembered most of it afterward. Conversations dissolved into meaningless noise somewhere in the background, while donors shook hands and photographers captured smiling faces beneath warm golden lights that suddenly felt artificial to him. Long after Rebecca Hale had left the ballroom, the tension she brought with her still lingered invisibly between him and Evelyn, like smoke trapped inside a sealed room. By the time they entered the private elevator descending toward the parking garage, neither of them had spoken in almost 15 minutes. Rain streaked slowly down the glass walls surrounding the elevator shaft, while the city lights shimmered beneath them in blurred reflections. Evelyn stood with her arms folded tightly against herself, staring straight ahead as though silence alone could hold the night together. Daniel finally looked at her. "Who is Noah Reed?" Evelyn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I already told you," she answered quietly. "He's a patient." "That's not what I asked." The elevator continued descending in silence for another few seconds. Outside, thunder rolled faintly somewhere above the city. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. Why would a CPS investigator walk into a donor gala looking like she just came from a crime scene and start talking about some random teenager unless something's seriously wrong? Evelyn still refused to look at him. "Daniel, not tonight." "Then when?" The question landed harder than he intended, because underneath the frustration now sat something worse. Fear. Not fear that Evelyn had lied. Fear that he no longer knew who she really was. When the elevator doors finally opened into the underground garage, cold air swept inside, carrying the distant smell of rain and concrete. Evelyn walked quickly toward the car without answering him, heels echoing sharply across the empty structure while Daniel followed behind. "Evelyn." She unlocked the car remotely. "Please stop." "No." The word echoed louder than expected through the nearly empty garage. Evelyn froze beside the driver's door. Daniel rarely raised his voice, which made the moment feel even more serious. He approached slowly now, rainwater dripping from the edges of his coat as he searched her face beneath the cold fluorescent lights overhead. "You looked terrified tonight," he said quietly. "Not uncomfortable. Not annoyed. Terrified." His eyes narrowed slightly. What did Rebecca mean when she said Noah was erased from his mother's life? Evelyn's breathing became uneven for the first time all evening. She turned away immediately, but Daniel caught it, and once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. "Oh my God." The realization came slowly across his face, not complete yet, but close enough to make Evelyn panic. "Daniel, no." He stepped back slightly as though distance might somehow help him think more clearly. "Tell me I'm wrong." She said nothing. That silence answered everything. The garage suddenly felt colder around them. For several long seconds, Daniel simply stared at her, trying desperately to force reality back into something recognizable. Then he laughed once beneath his breath. Not because anything was funny, because his mind couldn't process the possibility fast enough. "Noah," he murmured slowly. "That boy is connected to you somehow." Evelyn closed her eyes, and Daniel understood, not fully, but enough. The color drained from his face while years of memories rearranged themselves violently inside his head. Every conversation Evelyn avoided whenever children came up. Every time she insisted they stop at one child despite how much he once wanted a bigger family. Every unexplained panic attack she buried beneath work and perfectionism. Every wall she built around parts of herself he was never allowed to touch. "You had a child before me," he whispered. Tears immediately burned behind Evelyn's eyes, though she fought them down almost angrily. "It's complicated." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "Complicated. I was young. And he ended up homeless?" The words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn looked away again toward the rain-soaked garage entrance. "You don't understand what my life was before." "Then explain it to me." She shook her head immediately. "No." "Why?" "Because if I say it out loud," her voice cracked for the first time, "then it becomes real." Daniel watched her carefully beneath the harsh fluorescent lighting, while water dripped steadily from pipes somewhere deeper inside the garage. For the first time in years, Evelyn Carter no longer looked untouchable. She looked exhausted, broken, human, and somehow that made everything even worse. Daniel swallowed hard before speaking again. Does Chloe know? Evelyn's head snapped toward him instantly. No. Does Noah know? No. Who else knows? Evelyn hesitated too long. Daniel noticed. Jesus Christ. He turned away briefly, pressing one hand against his mouth while trying to steady his breathing. Somewhere nearby, a car engine echoed through the structure before fading again into silence. All this time, he whispered. All these years. Evelyn finally looked at him directly then, and for one devastating moment Daniel saw something he had never truly seen before beneath all her elegance and control. Shame. Not the polished kind people perform publicly. Real shame. The kind that destroys people slowly from the inside. I didn't know how to survive back then, she whispered weakly. I thought if I left that life behind, her voice trembled. I thought maybe eventually I could become someone else. Daniel's eyes hardened immediately. But he didn't get to become someone else, did he? Evelyn had no answer, and that silence hurt him more than the truth itself. The rain finally stopped sometime after midnight, but the city still looked drenched beneath the pale glow of streetlights and distant traffic. From the 7th floor of Carter Medical Center, Chicago stretched endlessly into the darkness, while Noah sat awake beside the ICU window wrapped in a gray hospital blanket, staring down at streets that suddenly felt very far away from the life he used to know. Sleep had become impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw pieces of things he wished he could forget. His father passed out at the kitchen table while bills piled beneath empty bottles. Cold nights beneath train tracks listening for footsteps that might mean danger. Hunger so constant it eventually stopped feeling unusual. The expressions people made whenever he asked for help. Not angry. Worse. Uncomfortable. As if his existence reminded them of something they didn't want to think about. Behind him, the television mounted near the wall played quietly with subtitles muted beneath the sound of medical equipment, humming softly through the room. Noah barely noticed any of it, until a knock interrupted the silence. Daniel stepped inside carrying 2 coffees. Noah straightened instinctively. You don't have to do that, Daniel said gently after noticing the reaction. I'm not a doctor. Noah relaxed only slightly. Daniel approached the window slowly before offering him one of the cups. Hot chocolate, he clarified. I figured coffee at 2 in the morning might be a terrible life decision at your age. Noah accepted it carefully. Thanks. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights reflected faintly across the glass, while distant sirens echoed somewhere below. Daniel studied him quietly before finally asking, How are you feeling? Better. You look exhausted. Noah stared into the cup, warming his hands. I'm kinda getting used to hospitals. Daniel frowned slightly. There were others? A few clinics. Noah shrugged weakly. Usually they patch me up fast and send me out. Something about the way he said it made Daniel's chest tighten painfully. Not bitterness. Resignation. The kind no 13-year-old should ever learn. You know, Daniel said carefully, most kids your age are worried about school or girlfriends or sneaking into parties. Noah almost smiled faintly. Sounds expensive. Daniel let out a quiet breath somewhere between amusement and sadness. For the first time since meeting him, he began noticing things beyond the exhaustion and bruises. Noah's intelligence, the sharpness behind his silence, the way he constantly watched rooms before speaking, as though survival had trained him to study danger first and trust second. And suddenly Daniel understood why Chloe had connected with him so quickly. Rebecca told me she spoke with your father today, Daniel said. The small warmth that had briefly entered Noah's expression disappeared immediately. He drunk? I don't think so. That's good. Noah lowered his eyes again. Means he probably had a decent day. Daniel hesitated before speaking again. Do you love him? Noah looked genuinely surprised by the question. After a long silence, he nodded once. Yeah. His voice came out quieter now. I know he screwed up a lot, but he's all I had. Daniel looked toward the dark city outside the window, while something painfully complicated settled deeper inside him. Because despite everything Marcus Reed had done wrong, Noah still defended him. Meanwhile, several floors below, Evelyn sat alone inside her office with every light turned off except the desk lamp beside her computer. The hospital had grown almost silent by now, reduced to distant footsteps and the occasional echo of elevators moving through empty floors. She hadn't gone home. She couldn't. Rebecca's words still circled endlessly inside her head, while Daniel's face in the parking garage replayed over and over like punishment she couldn't escape. "You had a child before me." The sentence sounded unbearable now because it reduced Noah into something almost clinical. Some hidden fact. Some mistake buried in the past. But Noah had never been a mistake. That was the part destroying her. Slowly, Evelyn opened the bottom drawer of her desk and removed an old photograph she had not looked at in over a decade. The edges were worn. In the picture, a much younger version of herself stood beside Marcus outside a tiny apartment building during winter. Snow covered the sidewalks around them, while Marcus held a baby wrapped in blue blankets against his chest. Noah. For several seconds, Evelyn simply stared at the photograph while tears blurred her vision. She remembered that day. Marcus had worked 14 hours straight repairing engines in freezing weather because the heating had stopped working again. They had eaten canned soup for dinner while sitting on the kitchen floor because there wasn't enough money to replace the broken table. Noah had cried almost non-stop that night from an ear infection they couldn't afford to treat properly. And she remembered the fear. Not fear of Marcus. Fear of staying poor forever. The memory hit so hard she pressed one trembling hand against her mouth. A quiet knock interrupted the silence. Evelyn quickly wiped beneath her eyes before answering. "Come in." Rebecca stepped into the office. Again. This time without the tension of public appearances surrounding them. No gala, no audience. Just truth. "I figured you were still here," Rebecca said softly. Evelyn laughed weakly without humor. "You really don't stop, do you?" Rebecca closed the door behind her. "Neither do you." The office fell silent again. Then Rebecca noticed the photograph resting near Evelyn's hand. Her expression changed immediately. "That's him." Evelyn didn't answer. Rebecca stepped closer slowly, staring at the younger version of Evelyn holding baby Noah all those years earlier. The image contradicted everything she had spent the last 24 hours believing about her. "You loved him," Rebecca said quietly. The words broke something inside Evelyn instantly. A tear finally escaped, despite all the control she had fought to maintain. "I did," she whispered. Rebecca looked genuinely confused now. "Then how could you leave him?" Evelyn closed her eyes, and for the first time in 13 years, she finally said the truth out loud. "Because I was weak." By the following afternoon, sunlight finally broke through the clouds above Chicago for the first time in days, though the city still carried the washed-out exhaustion left behind by the storm. Water dripped slowly from rooftops, traffic moved lazily through wet streets, and inside Carter Medical Center the atmosphere had shifted into something quieter, heavier, as though the building itself somehow sensed everything unraveling beneath its polished surface. Noah sat near the ICU window again, though this time he no longer looked outside. He was staring at Daniel. Neither of them had spoken for almost a full minute. Finally, Noah lowered the spoon back into the untouched bowl of soup resting on the tray beside him. "You've been acting weird since yesterday." Daniel let out a quiet breath through his nose. "Yeah," he admitted softly. "Probably." Noah studied him carefully. "Did I do something?" The question hit harder than Daniel expected. "No," he answered immediately. "None of this is your fault. None of this." The words hung heavily between them. Noah looked down at the blanket across his lap, while uncertainty slowly crept into his expression. For days now, he had watched adults move strangely around him, conversations stopping when he entered rooms, Rebecca asking questions nobody wanted to answer, Evelyn avoiding him whenever possible, while somehow also watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. He wasn't stupid. He had survived too much to miss the signs. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. Daniel looked toward the city outside before answering because he needed a few extra seconds to steady himself. "There are things about your past people should have told you a long time ago." Noah's shoulders slowly stiffened. "About my mom?" Daniel glanced back at him carefully. "Your father told you she left when you were little. He said she didn't want us anymore." The brutal simplicity of the sentence made Daniel's chest tighten again. "And if you met her today?" he asked cautiously. "What would you say to her?" Noah looked genuinely caught off guard by the question. For several long seconds he said nothing. Then he shrugged weakly. "I don't know." His voice remained calm, but Daniel could hear years of buried hurt beneath it. "Probably nothing." "Nothing? What's the point?" Noah looked back toward the window again. "You can't force somebody to care about you." Daniel swallowed hard, because he suddenly realized Noah already expected rejection before hearing the truth, and that broke something inside him completely. Before he could answer, a soft knock interrupted the room. Rebecca stepped inside first, and Evelyn followed behind her. The moment Noah saw Evelyn standing there, confusion crossed his face almost immediately. She looked nothing like the woman he had seen days earlier outside the hospital entrance. Her hair was loosely tied back now, no makeup hiding the exhaustion beneath her eyes, dark circles visible from sleepless nights. Even her posture looked different somehow, smaller, more fragile. Nobody spoke at first. The silence became unbearable almost immediately. Then Noah looked between all three adults slowly, and understood, not every detail, not the full history, but enough. His expression changed so subtly it almost hurt to watch. "No way," he whispered. Evelyn's eyes immediately filled again. Daniel stepped back quietly, giving them space neither of them knew how to survive. Noah stared at Evelyn with growing disbelief while years of imagined versions of his mother collapsed violently inside his head, all at once. He had pictured her 1,000 different ways over the years, sometimes cruel, sometimes dead, sometimes rich enough not to remember him, sometimes kind enough that leaving him never made sense, but never this, never her. "You're kidding," he said weakly. Evelyn shook her head through tears. "Noah." He stood up too quickly from the chair. "You're my mother?" The words came out sharper now, louder, pain finally breaking through the shock. Evelyn tried stepping closer, but Noah immediately backed away. "No." His breathing became uneven. "No, no, no. Noah, please." "All this time?" His voice cracked violently now. "You knew?" Evelyn covered her mouth briefly as tears spilled down her face. "Yes." The answer shattered him. Daniel watched helplessly, while Noah turned away immediately. One trembling hand pressed against his forehead, as though his mind physically could not hold the weight of everything changing at once. "You saw me out there," he whispered. "Outside the hospital." Evelyn nodded weakly. "And you recognized me." Another nod. Noah laughed once under his breath, not because anything was funny, because pain sometimes arrived too big for the body to process normally. Rebecca remained near the door, silently watching the entire moment unfold with visible heartbreak across her face. "You left me," Noah said finally, turning back toward Evelyn again. "You actually left me." Evelyn cried harder now. "I was scared." "You think I wasn't scared?" The words cut through the room instantly. "You know what it's like sleeping outside when it's freezing?" His voice trembled uncontrollably now. "You know what it feels like pretending you're not hungry because your dad's already drunk and crying and there's nothing left in the apartment except beer bottles?" Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Evelyn looked completely destroyed. "I hated you," Noah whispered. "For years I hated you." Tears finally burned down his face too now. "And the worst part is," he laughed weakly through the tears, "the worst part is I still wanted you to come back anyway." Something inside Evelyn broke completely at that. She sank slowly into the chair beside the desk, while sobs shook through her body, hard enough she could barely breathe anymore. "I'm sorry," she cried. "God, Noah, I'm so sorry." Noah wiped angrily beneath his eyes and turned away again toward the window, because looking at her hurt too much. Behind them, Daniel stood frozen between grief, anger, and something even more complicated, because despite everything Evelyn had done, he could see she loved him. Too late, but real. And somehow that made the tragedy even crueler. After several long minutes of silence, Noah finally spoke again without turning around. "Where's my dad?" Rebecca answered softly. "He's downstairs." Noah nodded once. "I want to see him." Evelyn immediately stood again. "Noah, please don't go like this." He turned toward her one last time, and the look in his eyes stopped her cold. Not hatred. That would have been easier. It was grief. Pure grief. "You don't get to ask me for anything right now." The words landed softly, but they destroyed her completely. Morning arrived quietly over Chicago, pale sunlight finally breaking through layers of thinning clouds, while the city slowly returned to motion beneath streets still wet from days of rain. Traffic lights reflected softly across puddles, trains rattled through elevated tracks, and inside Carter Medical Center the overnight silence faded beneath the gradual rhythm of another day beginning. Noah had not slept. He remained seated beside the ICU window long after Evelyn left the room, wrapped once again in the gray blanket, while exhaustion hollowed the sharpness from his face. Daniel stayed nearby most of the night without speaking much, understanding instinctively that some pain became worse when people tried too hard to fix it. Around 7 in the morning, Rebecca returned carrying discharge paperwork and a cup of burnt hospital coffee she already regretted buying. "You look terrible," Daniel told her quietly. "So do you." "Fair." Rebecca placed the folder on the small table beside the bed before glancing toward Noah. "How are you holding up?" Noah gave the faintest shrug imaginable. Rebecca nodded slowly as though she expected exactly that answer. "The doctors are clearing you for release later today," she explained gently. "Your vitals are finally stable." Noah looked down at the paperwork without touching it. "And then what?" The question settled heavily into the room because nobody had a simple answer anymore. Rebecca glanced briefly toward Daniel before speaking carefully. "Temporary placement was the original plan." Noah laughed weakly beneath his breath. "Sounds nice when you say it like that." Daniel watched him closely. "What does that mean?" "It means foster homes." Noah's eyes remained fixed on the floor now. "Temporary placement means nobody actually wants you permanently." Rebecca immediately stepped forward. "That's not true." Noah looked at her calmly. "It usually is." The quiet certainty in his voice hurt far more than anger would have. Daniel rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw while something inside him finally settled into clarity for the first time since the parking garage the night before, because all night long he had tried convincing himself there had to be distance between him and this situation. Some emotional boundary he could preserve. Some version of reality where Noah remained simply another tragic story, passing briefly through their lives. But that illusion no longer existed. Not after hearing him. Not after seeing him, and definitely not after realizing how quickly the boy expected abandonment from everyone around him. Daniel looked toward Rebecca. "How long before placement?" "A day or two at most." "And Marcus?" Rebecca hesitated slightly. "Honestly, he loves Noah, but right now he's still unstable. The alcoholism alone." "I know." Silence filled the room again. Then Daniel looked directly at Noah. "You said something yesterday that I haven't stopped thinking about." Noah frowned slightly. "What?" "That your father was all you had." Noah lowered his eyes again. Daniel took a slow breath before continuing. "You shouldn't grow up believing love only counts when it's attached to suffering." For the first time that morning, Noah looked genuinely confused. Daniel glanced briefly toward the skyline outside before speaking the words that had been forming quietly inside him for hours. "You don't have to go to temporary placement." Rebecca blinked. Noah stared at him without moving. Daniel held his gaze steadily now, despite the fear still tangled inside his own chest. "You can stay with me." The room fell completely silent. Noah looked almost unable to process what he had heard. "With you?" Daniel nodded once. "For as long as you need." Emotion flashed so quickly across Noah's face he immediately looked away again, as though even reacting openly felt dangerous. You barely know me. I know enough. Noah swallowed hard. What about your wife? The question changed the atmosphere instantly. Daniel remained quiet for several seconds before answering honestly. I don't know what's going to happen with Evelyn and me. His voice stayed calm, though exhaustion weighed heavily beneath every word now. But I do know none of this was your fault. Noah stared at the floor again while tears slowly gathered in his eyes, despite how hard he tried holding them back. Nobody in his life had ever chosen him before. Not without conditions, not without eventually leaving. Rebecca quietly stepped toward the window, giving both of them space while emotion thickened through the room almost painfully. Then another knock interrupted the silence. Marcus stood outside the door. For a second, nobody moved. Marcus looked different than before. Still exhausted, still worn down by years of damage, but sober now, completely sober. His hands shook slightly, though whether from nerves or withdrawal even he probably didn't know anymore. When Noah saw him, his expression softened immediately. Marcus stepped carefully into the room before stopping near the foot of the bed like a man uncertain whether he still deserved to come closer. Hey, kid. Noah tried smiling faintly. Hey. Marcus looked between Daniel and Rebecca before finally returning his eyes to Noah. I heard you're getting out today. Yeah. Another silence followed. Then Marcus nodded slowly toward Daniel. He told me what he offered. Noah glanced briefly toward Daniel again. Marcus swallowed hard before continuing. And he's right. The words clearly hurt him to say. You deserve stability, Noah. His eyes grew red almost immediately now. You deserve school and food and people who know what the hell they're doing. Dad. No. Marcus shook his head quickly. Listen to me for once. He forced a weak laugh through the emotion tightening in his throat. I spent years telling you things would get better while I kept destroying everything around us. His voice cracked. I can't keep making you survive my failures. Noah's eyes filled completely now. Marcus stepped closer carefully. But I swear to you. He pressed one trembling hand against his chest. I swear to you I'm done drinking. Rebecca quietly looked away. Even Daniel felt something tighten painfully inside him. Marcus continued staring at Noah like he was trying to memorize every second of the moment. I don't expect you to trust me yet, he admitted. Hell, I probably wouldn't trust me either. A tear finally slipped down his face. But I'm gonna earn it back if it kills me. Noah stood slowly from the chair before crossing the room and hugging him. Marcus broke instantly. Years of guilt, shame, addiction, and regret collapsed all at once while he held his son against his chest and cried harder than Noah had ever seen before. Daniel watched silently from beside the window while sunlight slowly spread across the city behind him. And for the first time since Noah collapsed outside the hospital, the room no longer felt consumed entirely by tragedy. Not healed, never fully healed, but changed. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, elevators opened and closed while nurses prepared for another long day. Outside, Chicago continued moving forward beneath clearing skies, indifferent to the lives quietly falling apart and rebuilding themselves inside one small ICU room high above the city. Noah eventually looked toward Daniel again, and this time, for the first time in the entire story, he no longer looked alone.